And welcome everybody. Very pleased to be speaking on behalf of the whole of the Finance Action Track, which has been very active over the past few months. I'll say a little bit about the context for our work, a little bit more specifically about what the Action Track has been up to, and end by talking about some next steps. Just by way of introduction, I'm Andy Deacon, Director of Strategy and Operations at the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, and I've been helping to facilitate some of the Global Covenant's work on financing with a background in energy efficiency in buildings in Europe and the UK. Next slide, please. When we kicked off work earlier this year, we asked our Action Track members why they were interested in joining. And as you'll see from this word cloud, some of them were quite clearly more mercenary than others, and recognized that the reason for wanting to get involved in a finance action track was because there was potentially money on the table. But also interesting that members are very keen on action or actions around engagement, recognize the immediacy of the problem, and a set of associated issues around that. And it's been great to have a fairly diverse group representing multilateral financial institutions, consultants, academics, others from kind of civil society NGO sector getting engaged in the discussions that we've been having, but a clear recognition also, as we heard from Gonzalo and Nigel, that in order to crack the problem, then delivering finance to move beyond planning and into ambition is an important part of the solution to working towards net zero and dealing with resilience and thereby addressing climate change. Next slide, please. So we've done some work within the Action Track to review some of the literature and other activity that's kind of gone before, and picked up on some work around drivers of what's loosely defined as bankability, or how ready kind of projects are to be able to receive investment. And a number of those kind of super relevant for the work that ICSI is doing, and demonstrate a clear role for the engineering community. So a recognition that technology risk features, that incomplete or poor preparatory reports can be a barrier to driving projects forward towards investment. That there's can be very complex execution of projects and a role to play in planning there. So a number of different factors that come together, but a clear role for an interface between the engineering community and the finance community, and that's what we want the Action Track to try to deliver. Next slide, please. Some of you will be now more than familiar with this increasingly famous diagram. So moving across a whole project life cycle, from planning all the way through to implementation, and some work that the Global Covenant and some of our partners had done previously indicated that there was really a gap in the kind of project feasibility and pre-feasibility stages of activity. In particular, when thinking about how to move beyond climate action plans, in some cases other kind of citywide sustainability plans, and start to identify individual projects and advance those for investment. And there is a real gap there, something that the Global Covenant has been involved in trying to plug with various partners on the City Climate Finance Gap Fund, which is something else that the Action Track has been looking at and considering, but it's not a unique problem there. So this idea of bringing together and providing technical resources and building capacity in that pre-feasibility and feasibility phase is a well-recognized gap, and again is somewhere where ICSI can play a clear role. Next slide, please. We've also discussed work that brings a private sector perspective to that. So this is not all about public finance. The public budget alone will never solve all of the climate issues that are on the table and facing us. So we need to think about ways to engage the private sector. So the Global Covenant had engaged with a group of former investment bankers and asked them to go out and conduct interviews with a whole range of investors, from banks, pension funds, private equity, and others. And they identified a set of key interventions that are necessary. And that includes funding for project preparation activities, greater attempts to try to draw the private sector earlier into the project development cycle, to support the advancement and preparation of projects. Definitely a role for greater preparation standards and technical expertise. And finally, work, as we heard also from Gonzalo and Nigel, around the importance of the enabling environment in terms of public institutional capacity, and dealing with some of those multi-level governance issues, trying to align cities and regions with national governments, and thinking about how to advance financing for sustainable infrastructure projects. Then while all of that was going on, then the COVID pandemic hit. And this graph is from the International Energy Agency's work on a sustainable recovery plan. And there is a clear recognition that kind of COVID-19 poses a great threat to cities. But at the same time, it can also strengthen the case for kind of green and sustainable action at local level. And their work showed very clearly kind of divergent paths between kind of action with a sustainable recovery and without, in terms of quantifying the emissions savings, either positively or negatively, as a result of taking that action. But we know that thus far, a lot of funding that's being brought forward and advanced for sustainable recovery is not being directed towards sustainable infrastructure. And so there was a recognition that there is work that ICSI and the members of the action track and the initiative as a whole could do to draw together experience around the role of pre-development finance, and then identifying key opportunities for that to be deployed as part of a green recovery. Next slide, please. So three broad areas of conclusion that we're drawing together in a position paper specifically addressing pre-development finance and green recovery. The first of these is about building robust project pipelines and advocating for financial recovery packages that include all of the things that you see on the slide there, but importantly include increased support for pre-development funding, kind of flexibility to blend different sources of finance together, and potentially infrastructure funds or centres to bundle or aggregate opportunities together and bring them to scale. Next slide, please. Then secondly, a set of recommendations coming forward around reducing financial risk in the implementation of large infrastructure projects, by including that work that I mentioned before around project preparation standards, again, advancement of project development and preparation facilities, work around public-private partnerships and kind of finance across the whole life cycle of projects, and looking at new structures, evolving the role of PPPs, using tax rules where possible to generate additional sources of revenue, and using green bonds as a revenue source. And then next slide, please. And then thirdly and finally, ensuring the sustainability of recovery-focused infrastructure packages by looking at tools like performance-based contracting and a role for third-party standards. So next, and then my final slide, having kind of now drafted that work and brought it together with the help of particular individuals who are on this call and have been very helpful in working with the action track to draw that material together. And we're working to finalize a position paper that links all of that material together and makes those key points about what we then believe is a package that can really play a role in advancing sustainable infrastructure through green recovery programs, and thinking, you know, not just nationally, but also locally and regionally about how that can be deployed. So we're in the process of finalizing the position paper, and we'll make that available to ICSI membership for comment next week, and then we'll open that up for comment for the next little while. Then we want to get the action track back together to talk about how we disseminate those findings and try to influence green recovery spending at local, regional and national level, and then to continue to develop the toolkit for practical action on financing sustainable infrastructure. So that was a very quick run through and a lot of information very quickly. My thanks again to everybody who's contributed to the work of the action track. And we're really looking forward to kind of advancing on this key issue that's a part of delivering on the sustainable infrastructure agenda in coming years. Thank you.